predicts the spread of communism. We talked about that in our last lesson. So we know it's not ending it. Not until the end of human government, which is predicted in the seventh trumpet. You remember we talked about in the seventh trumpet over here on our chart. You know, as you notice, I've got two charts here now. And I'm trying to show the difference, you know, the connection of the two. But the wrath of God, where God comes back at the seventh trumpet, this right here is where God ends human government. And so this world beast with all of its nations will come to a head where Jesus Christ fights against them. Now you remember we talked about the woes. You have the first woe at the trumpet 1, the second woe at trumpet 6, and then the third woe. Well, we've already entered in, we're already at the second woe. And this woe is I don't know where to call it, a symbol, but it's declaring an emergency. You're getting closer to the end. And so we're right on the verge of the second woe, if we haven't already entered it. But and I'll talk about more about that later. But now, before the Berlin Wall fell, communist/socialists, you know, these communist socialists had built a 29-mile wall around East Germany, and they had towers on the wall and guards to shoot anyone who tried to cross over the wall. So East Germany was locked in to communism at this time with a 29-mile wall around it. Again, Germany was considered dead after World War II when this wall was erected. There was an article by a man named George Ball, and this is pretty important, and the title was 3.5 Superpowers. He goes on to say in his article, he says in reference to the division of Germany and the division of Europe, he said in terms of world politics, the most dangerous of these problems is the division of Europe, which means the division of Germany. And he goes on to say, this division, and it's interesting the terms that he uses, this division that festers like a rusty knife wound must someday be healed. Notice how that these major world leaders and these major news anchors and people who are writing these articles in Time magazine and The Economist and different publications, it's amazing how they use the very words of the prophecy. It's like God's trying to shake people and say, this is it. He says this division that festers, he's talking about the division of East and West. This division that festers like a rusty knife wound must someday be healed, speaking in reference to Germany. In the USA Today, dated August the 14th, 1986, about 3 years before the Berlin Wall fell, they said the following. They described the Berlin Wall as the 29-mile wound that won't heal. Again, amazing, the wording used. in light of the prophecy of the Scriptures. Because John said in Revelation, "And I saw one of the heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed." They're using those same words in these publications. "And all the world wondered after the beast," or after the New World Order. Because right after the New World Order, right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the New World Order is born. Keep that in mind. 20 days after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the declaration went out that we're embarked on a new era, on a world government. In the November edition of Time magazine, dated November the 9th, 1989, after the Berlin Wall fell, it said, "The Berlin Wall did come down, and soon thereafter East and West Germany were reunited." So within 1 month after the fall of the wall, Pope John Paul II, President Mikhail Gorbachev, and President George Herbert Walker Bush met together, and from that time on, we began to hear continually from these three world leaders about the New World Order and world government. Wikipedia still calls this a conspiracy theory. You know, it's interesting to me that when I put on this clip, in fact, if you look at my clips, you'll see where they're talking about conspiracy theory. They actually put a little icon on there and says, "Yeah, this is conspiratorial." Even though it's on the back of your dollar bill, even though that now even the major news networks are actually talking about it now. I mean, it's gotten so obvious now that their ratings have become so low. They got to start picking up the pace, because they're looking so bad whenever they're not telling what it is. And so, anyways, this is amazing. Wikipedia calls it conspiracy theory. You see, the term conspiracy theory is like a buzzword. It makes people think that you're a nut. Anytime you say, "Oh, that's conspiracy theory," it makes people sound like a nut. The real nuts are the people that just refuse, and it's right in front of them, and they just deny it. The term conspiracy theory is used deliberately to discredit what you got to say. That's the popular way that it's being used today. But it's getting harder for people to use this now, because it's become so widely known now that even the mainstream news outlets have been forced to admit, or they become nuts, or rather instigators of false information. 1968 was a time when communism was raging. Fighting was going on between the communists and the non-communists. During 1968, it was the height of the Cold War. East and West Germany was in conflict. People in East Germany were fleeing to the West Germany to escape communism. During this time, Great Britain and Russia were bitter enemies through the 1960s. This was reason for the erection of the Berlin Wall in the first place. This is why the Berlin Wall was put in place. Things were very bad during 1968, and it looked like Russia and America would go to war. Up until 1989, which is the time the Berlin Wall came down, no one thought it was possible for this wall to ever come down, because of all of the fighting all of the division, the Cold War. Nobody believed. I mean, took people completely by surprise. Nobody believed. When people would make the statement that the Bible predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall, and there were those Bible scholars that made that prediction, they were wrote off as nuts. Conspiracy theorists, like the conspiracy theorists. They were nuts. Berlin Wall is never going to come down the way things are going on. You remember back in the 1960s, that was whenever people were building bomb shelters. They were buying these bomb shelters and installing them because they were looking for any day nuclear war to happen. You remember the Bay of the Pigs and all that stuff that was going on in Cuba? Everybody thought Russia and the United States was going to fight. There was great fear. No one ever thought the wall would come down. That was the last thing people thought would happen. The August edition of the USA Today, dated August the 14th, 1986, said, Berlin Wall, west is somber, east is festive. The Berlin Wall 25th anniversary Wednesday spotlighted its unique role as the stark symbol of East and West differences. Says the bricks mortar of propaganda, the 29-mile wound that won't heal. USA Today said, this wound ain't going to heal. It's always going to be there. So it was known as the 29-mile wound that won't heal. They used the terms right out of the Scripture in disbelief that this wound would ever heal. But it did. The Bible predicted this to be the deadly wound that would someday heal. And it did. The Bible said one of the heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. This prophecy came to pass on November 9th, 1989. This is the date, the very date to the day that this prophecy came to pass, to the letter. Time magazine, November the 20th, 1989, said, Wall of Shame, 1961 to 1989. It was the most palpable evidence of a deep wound in Europe's civilization. And it's finally gone. There you go. They're using that word again. Deep wound. The word wound is repetitively used in these articles. The wound, the wound. Within 20 days of the fall of the Berlin Wall, Pope John Paul II, Mikhail Gorbachev, and President George Bush Sr. met together and announced the birth of the New World Order. They did that 20 days after the deadly wound was healed. You remember Dick Cheney, which his name is Richard Cheney, but you remember the vice president. He was George Bush's vice president. Former U.S. Secretary, under George Herbert Walker, he was the former U.S. Secretary of Defense under George H. Bush during the time of the wall, when the wall came down. In 1991, Cheney says the following. He says, and this is a quote, "There's a good reason to take these steps now. The world is in a new era of promise that started 2 years ago with the collapse of the Berlin Wall." So Cheney marks the Berlin Wall as what marked the beginning of the New World Order. He makes that statement. And this is found in the September 29th edition, 1991 edition of the Indianapolis Star. He said he said this in 1991, that he knows that a new era of promise started in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. This was actually the birth of the New World Order. On November the 9th, 1999, there was an advertisement put out by Merrill Lynch. And this is what it said. The world is 10 years old today. Now keep in mind, this was written in 1999, this article was, in reference to the event that happened in 1989. So there's 10 years. So it says the world is 10 years old today. He's saying that 10 years ago from 1999, which puts us back at the Berlin Wall, Merrill Lynch is saying, hey, this is the birth. And he goes on to say, it was born when the wall fell in 1989. He says it. It's no surprise that the world's youngest economy, the global economy, is still finding its bearings. You see how the 10 horns is a part of this global system. It's because the 10 horn system is even though it was a European system at the time for the global economy, it's working on spreading across the earth. So it's finding its bearings. The intricate checks and balances that stabilize economies are only incorporated with time. This is what he says. Many world markets are only recently freed. Government for the first time by the emotions of the people rather than the fist of the state. From where we sit, none of this diminishes the promise offered a decade ago by the demise of the walled-off world. The spread of free markets and democracy around the world is permitting more people everywhere to turn their aspirations into achievements. And technology, properly harnessed, he says, and liberally distributed, has the power to erase not just geographical borders. You notice how they're erasing the borders now? But also human borders. The reason, well, let me finish. It seems to us that for a 10-year-old, the world continues to hold great promise. In the meantime, no one ever said growing up was easy. Notice in this last paragraph, they're talking about this world order. They're talking about the birth of this new world order, Merrill Lynch is. And he's talking about the erasing of the geographical borders. You remember when George Bush was in office and there was a big thing going on about the North American Union and bringing bringing that highway, that super highway across Mexico and bringing the borders. You know, people were up in arms. They were wanting to bring that corridor, talking about the corridor going through the United States. They're trying to erase borders. They're trying to bring down walls because they want to spread communism. And in order to do that, not only does the Berlin Wall, notice, the Berlin Wall fell. That marked the end of borders. From the time of the Berlin Wall, they have continued to try to tear down borders. Remember a few years ago when all that stuff was going on with ISIS and all of the Muslims were pouring into these countries. They want to tear down borders. It was a goal. It wasn't something that happened. Well, these poor migrants, they had to have somewhere to live. We had to help them out. We didn't have no choice. No, they created what happened because as you see, they planned all the way back to 1999 to do this. They knew in 1999, according to this article, that they were going to do it. This article was written 10 years after the birth of the New World Order. So the New World Order is 10 years old at this time. All of the evidence points to the birth of the New World Order immediately following the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. So what does this mean for us in this country that has a Bill of Rights? A country that we have all of our life heard that we have certain rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What does that mean for us? In 1992, a man by the name of Strobe Talbert said in Time magazine, speaking on the subject or title, The Birth of a Global Nation. He's talking about the birth of a global nation. And he said in the 21st century that national sovereignty would cease to exist as we have known it. And we would all answer to a single world authority. This is what he said. Just now wait till you hear who this man is. I'm going to bring that out in a minute. He makes this statement at the Council of Foreign Relations. Talbot tries to normalize the phrase global governance by saying these concepts have been taught in our schools, colleges, and publications for some time now. So that's supposed to make it normal. We're supposed to accept it because there's nothing to worry about. Well, this has been going on forever. You know, notice how people always do that when they want you to not be vigilant. They'll say, "Oh, don't worry about that. It ain't nothing." They've been talking about that forever. Ain't nothing to worry about. That's what he's saying here, as though this lends legitimacy to in some way to global governance. Because it's been taught in schools and colleges. Sure it has. The books are put out by UNESCO. UNESCO is a division of the United Nations. Sure it does. He goes on to say, this means a single capital. This is what he says. This means this is their goal. A single capital, a single flag, a single national anthem, and all nations being subject to one world global government. Now you wonder why that they're tearing down statues today? They're wanting a single capital, a world capital, a single flag, a single national anthem. So if they're going to have an anthem and allegiance to a government, like America has a flag and a national anthem and a capital, if they're going to have that, they can't have that without erasing what we have. Because it's to point the masses and the generations to a world government ruled by Satan. So he says, Talbert goes on to say, he says the sovereignty of every nation will be subordinate to a single global government. This is a quote. He goes on to say that this global government is not a dream, but reality now. He says this is not something we're dreaming about doing. It's already here. It says global governance is just a fact of life. Again, who is Strobe Talbert? Strobe Talbert worked in the Clinton administration for 7 years and was Bill Clinton's roommate during the Rhodes Scholar in England. They stayed together during the college years in London, England. He was also president of the Brookings Institute. So here you've got a globalist saying world government's here. It's already here. Now we talked about the deadly wound. Let's go back to that for a moment. You've got, so the deadly wound, let's just go ahead and wrap this up so we understand clearly what this deadly wound is. The deadly wound is where the Third Reich, you have the First Reich, the Second Reich, and the Third Reich. The Third Reich of Germany, and remember the word Reich means kingdom, that's what it means. And you remember Daniel, from the book of Daniel, the beast represented kingdom. So the beast that received the deadly wound, it was healed at the Berlin Wall. When the Berlin Wall fell, world government was established, and Germany came into its Fourth Reich. It became a Fourth Reich. So it's that fourth head that's connected to this world beast of nations that become one world beast that we find at the seventh trumpet. And so here we have all of these nations. Now the Bible says that these nations become 10 nations. There's 10 nations that's going to be a part of this world power during the time of the battle of Armageddon. There will be nations, the Bible lets us know, there will be nations that will resist. When this fight happened. In fact, we are seeing right now nations that are upset about all of this virus stuff going on. I can easily see right now that this is the period where nations will break away and there will be this disturbance. And I can also see the sixth trumpet judgment where a third of the population will die, the Bible says. And so we see very possibly that over this virus situation could be the fulfillment of the sixth trumpet judgment. I mean, I don't want to say that because we're still speculating. We can't, hindsight is 2020. What do they say? Hindsight is 2020. When you look behind you, we're going to know a lot clearer if that was the case, just as we did all these other prophecies that we covered. I encourage you to go through all these trumpet judgments, all of these lessons that I've got. I challenge you to go on these lessons and follow closely each step, because we're right at the sixth trumpet judgment, which I believe very well by the midterm election, I believe that there is a strong, I'm not going to say it will, but it looks very, very promising that at that point that very well we could see the sixth trumpet judgment, the hammer falling down, and see a lot clearer. One thing we know, that sixth trumpet judgment, when the Bible predicts 1/3 of the population dying, how could you miss that? What is it? 1 out of every 4 individuals on the planet? 1 out of every 4. I believe that was the figure. So again, we are at the second woe of Revelation. We are at the sixth trumpet, the second woe. So while we're living in dangerous times, certainly for people that are not right with God, that reject God, it's a time of promise for people it's a wonderful time for people who are ready, that are prepared themselves, and that are looking for the return of Jesus Christ. We see the revealing of this. We see how plain this is. After studying this for so long, I wished I could put this in people that's still struggling with understanding. I wish I could just put it in them. But I just ask that you continue studying behind what I've put forward and going in through the Bible, through the Scriptures, and verifying what I've said. Because this is an amazing thing that's happening right now. And so it's been good having you with us, and we're going to close. This is the end of our lesson on New World Order. We're going to go into another lesson. But it's been good you being with us. And so may God keep you until our next lesson. And so thank God for you being with us. And thank God for being with us in this lesson.